was kind of explaining how the same kind of registry could support more than one endpoint. So you, even though like HPD and CSD may not be like 100% compatible, right? You could have two endpoints, one for each, and each one, will, one will stop growing, I guess, the HPD one, and then you implement the CSD one, and they're just different endpoints, different versions differently. I actually thought that in general for IHE, it might be smarter to try to do like smaller profiles that are like accumulative, right? That have more functionality rather than one profile that keeps growing that has to keep backwards compatibility. For example, in facility registry, we support, from the early days of the discussion of standards-based facility registries, we support like a full GeoJSON endpoint, right, which conforms to all the exchange formats and specs of GeoJSON datasets, then GRSS, and then we have the FRED one, right, which is more of a kind of like a convention, right? It's not an ISO standard, so to speak, but it's kind of like a convention based on standards that works. And now when CSD comes out, we'll just implement another endpoint alongside all of those for CSD.
Okay.
So yeah, so that's and then I think that that's actually a healthy kind of roadmap. If that helps IHE do smaller profiles, registries could start, implementing them and deciding to be actors for them on a more granular basis instead of having one profile that grows and grows and grows, which it brings all these issues of backwards compatibility in and so on. So
yeah,
maybe that's something to bring to Derek if you guys are facing that.
Yeah, I mean, I think our perspective is a little bit different since we are, we're not coming with, a legacy API that really needs to fundamentally support. We're free to, we don't have a huge implementation basis and that we want to preserve for the provider registry. So, and from our point of view, HPD works quite well for certain things, at least in terms of the data fields that are processed, not necessarily the API itself, but the data model is decent enough.
Yeah. There's both aspects. So, but you're going to end up implementing HPD, and then they're going to have a CSD alongside. Hey, Matt.
Hey, guys.
Hey, thank you for joining.
Hey, Matt.
Hey, let me close out, and I'll get back in. I think my video screwed up. I'll be right back.
No problem. Did we lose Jorge?
I'm not sure what happened.
And one question, Carl, how are you guys collecting the feedback for CSD?
Primarily, it's been myself and Dickie, and to some extent Luke. But we asked for input from the provider registry community, but haven't gotten a whole lot. I mean, we did some sensitization and said, okay, here's use cases that we have and collected. Here's the use cases that CSD supports. Are there any concerns, any dissent? And no issues were raised. One thing that we did raise was kind of extending, using the WHO definition of a health worker rather than just a clinical service provider being both. And I think that caused some changes on the XSD. I think cleaned it up quite a bit in any case, simplified the data model.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know what? We have this. I created this repo in GitHub for the IHE feedback. I think you saw it going out last night. And, so we had discussed things with Derek and with documents and so on, but I thought just having it out there was going to be better. I didn't want to have it mixed up with actual facility registry, kind of like FRED discussions. It seemed like kind of mixing things. So if you guys don't mind, as you come up with more feedback, if you want to use that, people already subscribe to that, and we can then consolidate that to triage things with Derek.
Okay. No, that seems reasonable to have a point of contact. I'm also going to be sitting. We sat in on the CSD technical call with IHE, I guess, 2 weeks ago, and we'll be sitting in on it on Monday as well. So
okay.
So we joined IHE, IntraHealth joined IHE community, whatever group, so that we can provide formal feedback.
Okay. And okay, so it's interesting. If you're there on Monday, maybe you can present this as part of the feedback from the community. Maybe it's, I mean, it's not the provider registry community, but it's a general OHIE community as well.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind doing that. It'd be helpful if you gave me a little bit of narrative and context. From, I mean, I can guess at what you're wanting, and I think your email from last night helps quite a bit. But if there's anything specific, larger issues with that are coming up on that issue tracker, then
no, the issue tracker is capturing everything that we can, and I also invite everybody who showed up since, Jorge, Matt, etc., to hi Wendy, to basically comment on these issues if it's something that interests you, and this will be sent back to the standards folks. We're hoping to influence the standards a bit, and we've created this channel for it. So okay, Carl, I'll make sure that you have the link for the issues, and if you read the issues, you will see that they have a lot of content in them, and like a suggestion for how to change things and so on. So I'll send it to you, and if you have any questions for some of them, that'd be great. And if you could present those as part of the feedback from OHIE, I think that also would be great.
Okay, no, that's no problem. I also want to say that joining HIE or IHE was really easy to do. It took 20 minutes of filling out on a form, and I'd encourage everybody else to join as institutional members.
Okay. I just wanted to mention that we started recording a few minutes ago, even though it doesn't say on air. We're just using another. I'm using another tool to record it so we can call people in over the phone, since Google doesn't currently support that with on-air Hangouts. So just wanted to mention that.
Okay, good. So any other questions about IHE and what we're doing for that, and what the heck is all those issues in that other repo about? Anybody else interested in IHE stuff? Not for today? Jorge, can we hear you? No. That's awesome. I'm sorry, man. It's all right. I see you're having pain with is it the headset that maybe it's causing you issues? Man, I don't know. Oh, well.
Jorge, if you want, put your phone number in the chat box, and I can call you in. So
just to wrap that, we created a repo with these issues. Those issues are capturing feedback that we have on the documents. The documents for the standards are being kept in a FTP folder somewhere, which makes it kind of hard because we don't know where things have changed. So I've actually migrated some of the documents here to the. I see things changing in the FTP site. I will bring in the documents, but it reminds me of the old Fred days when there was no kind of like change management, and Matt hadn't still done his awesome, kind of a website and so on. But here are the links in the Hangout if you can see them, and Carl will make sure you get them out of band later on.
Just one quick question before we move on from the IHE. So I posted one issue, it was about XML, but it was in support of the IHE profile. Should I move that over to the other issue tracker, the new one, or leave it where it is?
You posted one issue in the old issue track, in the old...
in the Fred issue tracker about the supporting having an XML export. Do you want me to keep that where it is since it's more related to Fred API, or would you rather have that in the IHE?
No, I think that was about having an XML format for the Fred API, right?
Yes.
Yes.
But
okay,
it's in support of IHE, so
Oh yeah, but whoever benefits from it, but you're not changing the semantics of the API. We're not changing like the format of the documents.
No.
I mean, it's XML, but you would still have the same facility object as Fred, just in XML, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So no. I think that keeping that in the Fred API is okay. Matt, are you okay with that as well?
Yeah, that's fine with me. But I just wanted to clarify with you.
All right. If there's no objections, I would rather keep it in the Fred API. Then. Yeah. Yeah. Here comes XML. You can run, but you can't hide. Okay. So I think we can leave that one in the original issue tracker, and let's go all now. So since we have this diverse audience, and sometimes the agenda, I mean, I think it's a good thing, but the agenda sometimes hops around depending on who's joining. I would like to hear from Matt and Jorge and Carl if there were specific issues you were hoping on discussing today that we can get into.
I'm open. I haven't really reviewed the issues. I'm just looking at it now, so if anybody has any suggestions,
my main concern is just facilitating the integration of the CSD and HPD profiles with the facility registry. So that's whether, I mean, there's a couple of issues in the issue tracker that are related to that. The one that Chris Ford recently commented on, and the one that I just mentioned.
Yeah, okay. So I think that's a good one because it also has the issues to create links between the providers. So
yeah.
In general, I haven't commented back on Chris's comment, but in general, in any service-oriented architecture, when you have these two-way relationships between data, and I'll use the webcam. Sorry, Carl, you won't see this. You want to make sure that there is one master service for each chunk of data. And in this case, for example, where Chris's example was, hey, how do I know which providers work at a facility? And the provider registry is the service that supports that. Then that would be the service that you would go and ask that of, right? And maybe you can also ask the same question of a facility registry, but the facility registry wouldn't be the owner of that data. It would just be read-only stuff, and it would probably be smarter just to send to create a REST link to the index of which workers work for that facility on the provider registry to kind of offload that. So in general, even though it's interesting information to navigate in any ways, I would say that the facility registry would not own the master data for that relation. Matt, I don't know what you think about that, or Jorge or Martin, but we haven't had use cases where we needed to replicate the index of health worker providers, and if we did, we would try to make sure that it's either maintained in the facility registry or provided externally. But you wouldn't want to have both being updated in the scenario that Chris mentions, and they could get into conflicting situations. I don't know, do you guys see us creating, for example, a data type, which is which workers work here, and then listing in there all the health worker IDs and kind of maintaining that independently of the provider registry? Or is it more likely that the provider registry will have the providers and then have an entry for where they are working?
I don't know. Can we talk to like an example, maybe use case?
Yeah. So, for example, you wanted to see. No, that's not a use case. Let me think of one from the CSV document. Basically, let's say you want to give a raise to all the health workers that are in a particular facility because they met a goal. I'm making it up. It's a very bad use case, but it kind of illustrates the point.
Yeah, I think you'd want that stored in the other. You wouldn't want that stored in this. You just would want to know how to find it, right?
Right. I think that if the provider registry had an href link to which facility the health workers work with, and it provided all the query like get workers by facility or something, then it could just have a URL to the facility data as a reference, but it would manage that relationship data, and no, and there wouldn't be any confusion about in which registry it was in.
I mean, that seems to me that what makes sense. It doesn't seem like you want to re-implement what CSD or HPD are already doing.
Yeah, and that would simplify things. And then there's some, and we're talking about this like dynamic relationship data. In some cases, and I'm just going to put a facility and a provider here. In some cases, there are named links that could be that are not about maintaining that that relationship that a facility can have. For example, the facility manager, right, could be a direct link between the facility registry and the provider registry and doesn't need that intermediate kind of relationship management. And in that case, just being able to put in the ID and the URL corresponding to that would make it for interlinking. For example, yeah, we have seen people wanting to put in what is the manager of this facility and things like that. So those could be working with a specific link. And that refers to issue number 59 in the FRED API. I'm going to post it here in chat. Okay, thanks, Matt.
Oh, so that facility manager, with the CSD profile, there was a contact person for this facility, but that's probably not the facility manager. Do you know if the facility manager is referenced in the CSD as a specific role at a facility?
Hold on a second. Let me open. I have the XSD open here.
I don't think it is, but
let me see. We have identifiers, type, status, name, address, contact person, and it's a person's thing.
So this is Derek. I can maybe speak to that one.
Okay.
So we've got
Hi, Derek.
Hi there. We've got two options, and one is to use. It came up on the OHIE technical call, which actually Dickie and Carl were both attending. Whether or not that should be something that we maintain independently, so we have the field is already there, a contact person, and we can put the information there. But a useful sort of question was raised that, well, why don't we just put a link to say that that is one of the provider types, and one of the provider types, a perfectly valid provider type, is somebody who's doing, a district health manager or whatever, who might be the facility manager. Mm-hmm. So that's also there as a facility provider relationship. Mm-hmm. So we could use either or both of those. And one of the things that I think would be interesting is to see what would be the impact of not using the link, because that actually gives us the ability to have a facility registry that's independent of a provider registry, and have the content maintained by the facility registry in its own right, or to use the link, which has this presumption that we have a shared ID that we can figure out and only reference by ID.
Yeah, I think that what we would be trying to do, and the direction in which we were going, starting in the last call, actually preserves having the reference to the provider registry, but not just storing an ID, but actually storing the full URL of the data element. So Derek, you missed this part, and if you want, we can stay for a couple of minutes after we end the call with all the group, so I can because we started the call discussing OHIE, so you came in just as we were.
I'm sorry I missed the beginning of it.
No, but I mean, I think this is a relevant discussion for everybody. So we were discussing how to represent the links to the provider registry and other sort of external references of information inside the data. And this is a perfect example where you have the contact person or the manager or whatever role the country wants to assign to a particular thing, and they say this is a provider registry person, right? And they would know probably the ID of this person, and they will probably know where the provider registry is, and that is all you need to know to effectively create a link back to the information about that person. And that way, when somebody queries the data here, they would get, for example, the facility, the name, the location, whatever, and then they would get, oh, the manager is on this URI, and then that URI would have the full representation, which is a nice kind of RESTful way also to separate it. And it allows like interlinking. And then both, obviously the provider registry could do the same thing, right? Just provide RESTful pointers back to the facility registry. So, and so then, I mean, I think it has a very small effect on the CSD XSD, which is making sure that that can also be represented as a URI and is not just an ID field, that foreign key, and then the server, the client would need to know how to use that ID to get to the item. And so one of the things that we were discussing is how to embed that URL and what is the configuration that we would have in a data type there. So I don't know, Martin, this is maybe a question for you. Oh, and I think Matt dropped. If we had like a data type which was like a provider and a provider registry data type, and we knew the base URL of the provider registry, and we knew how to create item URLs based on the IDs, we could have people just enter the IDs when they're doing data entry, right? But then in the API, return the full dereferenced URL so that it points to that entity. You think that would be something we could do?
Yeah, I think so. We can do that.
So Ed, one of the challenges that we'll have with CSD is that CSD has a presupposition that you talk to the manager. That's who you have. A consumer talks to a manager, and the managers talk to. So there's an abstraction layer that's built in, and that was first of all, it enabled all kinds of useful things. But second of all, it more closely aligned with the OpenHIE pattern that you don't talk to registries, you talk to the HIM.
Well, but if CSD is something that's implemented by the HIM, then we shouldn't worry ourselves with it, should we?
Well, no, I just was raising the issue that that any kind of API that expects to talk to registries directly is bypassing the HIM.
By definition, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that is, I mean, not for I mean, it's not necessarily bypassing the HIM logically, it's bypassing the HIM physically, right? I mean, that's one important distinction to keep in mind. But so we were trying to discuss here how to represent links between the registries so that the information could be referenced both ways and do it in a way that's simple for users to manage. And yet when the APIs get used by the clients, they don't have to have magic information embedded about where the provider registry is and things like that. So, and then implementing this in the CSD profile would also, I think, make it much stronger because it would allow it to operate in a more RESTful way where you can say, oh, this provider is in this registry, this provider is in that registry, and you're not worried about kind of you're not worried about what to do with that magic ID number, so to speak. Right?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the difference.
Yeah. So, and maybe we can discuss later. We've started documenting some of the OHIE feedback and issues. I don't know if you saw the email yesterday, but we can go over those later if you want in more detail. So we had started discussing, I'm going to share screen here for a second. Where are we? Here. So this was the issue we were trying to debate, and if we go to here, boom. And if we go to our facility objects, we had actually discussed segregating all the different links into a specific section. So to basically so that client there's an interlinking going on. So just like we have the properties bag and the identifiers bag here, we would have a a links bag.
External links or something like that.
Yeah. Did we actually? Let's just assume this, and then for each one, we would be able to have like it was a type, href, and like the ID or other information, where the type would be, for example, MO. The href would be, oops, HTTP, whack, I don't know, pro slash employee slash 123 and then ID would be that ID separated out from the href. And when we discussed with DHIS, it would have helped them dereference some of the information they need to dereference, like more information about the facility, but also it would allow the interlinking of. I'm going to remove this one; it's confusing. It would allow the interlinking, and the type would be basically the code, the data element that the Ministry of Health has defined. So, for example, it would be referencing an something like that. Oh, sorry, Scott. Thank you for the heads up. So I don't think Carl can actually see this, but I don't know, Martin and Jorge, if you can see it, if you have any opinions, that would be great.
Yeah, I can see it. I think it would work. This is nice. Something nice about that is that it also allows you to define with the same structure, URLs for collections. So you can define a type which would be providers, and then just link to a view in the provider registry where you could get all the providers for a given facility. So.
Oh, it would even like allow the provider to do the topic that we were talking. Kind of instead of being contact person is employees.
Like that, yeah. I think that's handy because you can. It's more dynamic.
Okay. One would probably be empty then. Oops. I don't know what happened there. My facility. Okay. Something like this. So that's interesting. So it allows you to both have linked collections of items in the other registries as well as specific entities.
So you don't need to be totally up to date with every single employee of the facility, for example. You just link the collection. That's
perfect. And Derek, we can then discuss how to make this sort of a syntax compatible with the XSD of CSD. So that ASCSD also supports the hrefs.
It would have to be compatible with the pattern that CSD is using. And the CSD pattern is not to do an end run around the manager.
No, I'm talking about the CSD data document, like this CSD definition, this XSD. So this document assumes that, for example, you would have the ID of a provider and things like, and a service and things like that embedded. And what we're talking about is that whenever you see those IDs, it's an opportunity to ask, does it make sense to have just that ID, or do I want a full URL, a full URI to that entity so that you can actually link to the information directly?
But that's my point, so that you could link to it directly, which is antithetical to the pattern that it's operationalizing. I think I must admit I might be getting a little wrapped around the axle, so I'd probably have to see a little diagram to see what the expected sequence is. But it sounds like the expected sequence is that I would go through the process of using the abstraction layer, then I would get something that I could navigate and completely bypass the abstraction layer.
No. Like a client, for example. Let's say you wanted to build a list of all the pictures of all the people who work in a facility, right, and put them on a map in a certain location, just as a funny use case to consider. You would query the facility registry for the location, the lat long of that facility, right? And that document would come back, and if you knew magically, because you know out of band from the HIM how to get all the employees for that facility, you wouldn't necessarily go and dereference that link. But if the HIM wanted to see how to get a list of all the employees that worked in that facility, it would just dereference that link and use it in its operations to get the list of people and their little pictures back, right? And then return that message back to the client. This is it's not about necessarily having a particular mode of interaction with clients. It's about having, a foreign key has hidden information, right? If I just give you a foreign key, you don't, the HIM doesn't fully know what to do with it. The HIM has to have, like magic knowledge about where the other registry is and what the URL is and what to do with that URI. And what we're talking about here is a pattern where the HIM doesn't have to rely on having that secret knowledge, where the actual knowledge is explicit, so that you don't have to go and remember where that is or look at it posted in the wall, but rather the interlinking is technically specified.
Right, and that's the problem CSD solves, is that you can do the join, you can express the join in your query, or that's the premise of it. And I am so sorry. Not only have I joined this call late, but I get the kind of growing feeling in my gut that there's an entire conversation, a preceding conversation that I've missed.
A little bit, but I think you'll get caught up.
It's probably months in duration.
No, I mean, we started with this linking topic in actually months ago, and what happened is that we paused it to be able to work on some of the fundamentals, because we were like going into linking before we were agreeing on how to, filter a list. So we decided to like take a step back for the advanced topics like versioning and the linking and so on until we had a 1.0 version. And then the linking was rose way rapidly to the top of the next batch of issues to discuss. But we usually for these calls we try to keep focus on at most 3 topics. And Jorge is on the line, and in the first 20 minutes more or less we discussed IHE and like where we were keeping the feedback for that, and like Carl would relay some of that in the next IHE call. The second part we were discussing the linking, and I'm going to propose this to the broader list. I know there's people that are very opinionated about these formats, so we want to bring them on as early as possible. And I wanted Jorge to ask you, do you have any particular topic you would like to discuss for the last 15 minutes of the call?
No, not particularly. Right now I'm just trying to absorb as much as I can. So whatever topics the group has that they would like to discuss, I don't have any particular direction that I want to go in for this conversation.
You know what, I think maybe there's just, part of it is there's an issue that the facility registry has this RESTful interface and CSD has this X query, and we're trying to figure out what is a good crossover and a way to translate between the two. And I know, Derek, we've already discussed of identifying certain queries that we want to write out and specify that the CSD needs to support. And one of those queries would be, who is this provider? So having a mechanism to translate an ID into a certain small subset of queries that are supported by X-query and on CSD might be a useful way to solve this issue here. Saying, okay, because I mean it's really not just a URL; it's a whole small XML document that we're talking about on the CSD side. So if a mediator, I mean, I think what you're asking for, Ed, is that the mediator would have a direct URL, and I don't think that that's in the scope of CSD. If I'm understanding that correctly.
No, so let's separate things. If we're deciding if the mediator is the implementer, I'm sorry. So it looks like just I took a step back to ask if anybody had any other topics. If we're going to jump back into this, is it okay for everybody? I guess so. So if the mediator is going to be the only one that can implement CSD because it needs to dereference all the information and become an aggregator, then it's one thing. What we're trying to do is find out, represent ways so that the information that this aggregator, this CSD, kind of accumulator of data needs to do, so that it doesn't have to have hidden knowledge, right? So right now, it would typically have to know in some way where the provider registry is. It would get, for example, a provider ID from the facility object and go and say, oh, I know what to do with this, and go and get it, right?
Right.
And by having the full dereference URI, it allows the aggregator, the CSD, actor to say, oh, I know it will be somewhere else, but I don't have to magically know where it is. The documents are telling me where it is. And that is, has a lot of benefits. For example, one of the benefits is that it allows a federated environment where, let's say, the Ministry of Health has one provider registry that it's maintaining, and then a large NGO like Partners in Health might have another provider registry, and the mediator implementing the aggregator or the aggregator of CSD would be able to just use that, and you're not like kind of presupposing a unique registry for all information. And that federation is useful in these environments where private sector and public sector kind of have similar sizes and strengths. Another benefit is that it allows for other approaches to keys that different provider registries or facility registries might implement. For example, if you might have a composite key for a particular set of providers, this would allow you to keep that, whereas assuming that it's only one ID, I think it's an optimistic assumption, but this way you don't even have to make the assumption. The standard is simplified, and you just say, here's the URI to the information. And,
but I think what you're missing is with the CSD, as I understand, it's not a specific URI gets you to a provider. There is a URI to query the CSD with a specific X query that's based on that provider. So
no, I get that. I get that. So,
are you asking for like named queries on the mediator, like saying, here's my ID and here's for a provider, fetch me the information, Mr. Manager or Mediator?
No, I think we're confusing two discussions. One of them is what is the interface of the mediator exposing CSD, and what is like the design of the CSD aspect, and the other aspect is like how do the registries expose information to represent this interlinking. And I was trying to.
But it sounds like if a document has a reference, there's an expectation that all of the governance around who's able to talk to who and what's the management of the information would. Like if I put a new reference in there, I just consume it. I don't have any requirement to say that certain, like could a stranger belly up to the bar and say, hey, I'm a provider registry?
Only if they have the permissions to do that, and then if they can get in. But that's by definition, right? So if you have a new provider registry, sorry?
The URI can just point somewhere and say, this is where the rest of the provider information is. What's the governance around where that URI is pointing?
The same governance you would get around the mediator having that URI, the same one. So the same way that whoever types in the URI to your provider registry in the CSD would type the URI for the provider registry in this in a particular registry. right? I mean, that's the governance. So you could even make it discoverable if you wanted. But the point is that it doesn't change the governance approach, right?
But I guess I'm really confused because I don't understand that there is a specific URI pointing to a provider. So it's really a URI plus an X query, right? I mean, so
no.
I don't think
right. That's the assumption is that all the providers, all the registries, and elements that expose information that is going to be used in this health system, have some form of accessing that information programmatically to some level of granularity. So you're right. The links that we were discussing have the assumption that I can access a particular provider registry entry, right? A particular provider with a particular URL, which is it is an assumption. You're right. It is not necessarily a bad assumption, and it helps a lot of architectural patterns if you can do that. But it is an assumption. You're correct. So, for example, when you're the provider registry,
that's not right now supported by CSD. So what you're asking for is perhaps a way of taking a subset of queries, of X queries, like get me the provider information, and naming those at the mediator level and saying, okay, here's a URI that is just query the provider information. So it's like a shortcut.
No, it's not a shortcut. It's not a shortcut. It's an important thing. Is your URI link.
Yeah, so, but that's not how OpenHIE is currently working, or is it how OpenHIE is currently working? I didn't know that we had that.
What do you mean the OpenHIE? OpenHIE is a working group. It's not a thing.
No, sorry. Just the pattern of the. If we are in Rwanda today and wanted to get information about a provider, could we execute a link like that?
I don't know what sort of API the HIM is exposing to the. I don't know what sort of API the provider registry is exposing to the HIM. One would hope that this sort of dereferencing is possible because it allows a bunch of scenarios. For the facility registry, for sure, this is supported, and this is how it's being queried.
So the provider registry in Rwanda is only a lookup of by national ID as whether the person is in their system or not. That's the current iteration. That we're moving towards HPD, which is a much broader implementation, but again, there is not that specific URI for the provider. I mean, it's just a different design pattern, and and I guess we just need to talk about what is that interface between the RESTful pattern that you're promoting on the facility registry side and that design pattern with the URI with the kind of the SOAP-ish type pattern.
Well, if you can't point to a piece of information inside the provider registry, it'll be hard to.
I'm not saying you can't point to it. I'm saying that it's a URI plus a query, whether it's a DSML query in the case of HPD or an X query in the case of CSD. So it's not a single piece of information. It's two pieces of information.
So you would say, for example, for provider registries using type contact person in HPD, have the URLs, and then you would assume that this is a post, and then you would have a query.
And the accessing of the facility registry at present doesn't go through a bus or a middleware or a HIM or something like that. It's direct?
I don't understand the question, sorry.
Do you directly access the facility registry, or do you access the facility registry through the HIM in Rwanda?
Who is a you?
A client.
It depends on what the client needs. So for the Ministry of Health, for some cases, it's sending them through the HIM, and then for other cases, it's not. And there's good reasons to do both in Rwanda.
So we had a similar type of discussion for the provider registry, what we should be doing, and whether all queries should be going through the provider, through the HIM, or should we only do some of them through the HIM and expose other things for the provider registry, more openly. And the consensus that we came to was to send everything through the HIM. Part of that is because we want to keep the provider registry relatively dumb, and all of the specific business rules for an implementation, the validations that need to occur, the interfacing with the facility registry, let the HIM handle as much of that as possible, and keep the actual architect, like I said, to keep the provider registry as dumb as possible.
Well, and centralized authentication and security and things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I will not speak to what are the forces that lead you to put different logic in the ESB or not. I think it's a bit beyond of the scope of this call, but there's good reasons to do both in different cases. The important thing is that the Ministry of Health is still in control of what is the logic that happens when things happen inside of these services, right? So you want the ESB to still, the HIM to still know, for example, hey, what to do, for example, if a facility changes, it needs to be able to trigger a business workflow whenever a facility closes, for example, and that's all important. Like I think that the discussion of like going physically through the HIM versus going logically through the logic represented in the HIM is sometimes a bit mixed up. And I'll gladly kind of describe how the HIM is still in the middle, even though the APIs of the facility registry are accessed directly, if that makes sense to you. It's just that in Rwanda, the use case is so simple, they haven't had the need really to put it like in the middle. They just need to know if a facility exists. So, and it's correctly identified. So, but I gladly kind of, maybe that's a good topic for, not for necessarily a call, but maybe for a blog post or something like that, explaining how in this architecture where you have the HIM still has all the control of the business logic and all the kind of validation and like, complex business workflows that correspond to like adding facilities and managing facilities and working with them. And that does not either preclude nor change the need to, in some cases, access the APIs of the facility registry directly.
But I thought one of the, if I'm recalling, one of the main arguments was that we want to be able to plug and play and drop out the provider registry. We want, we're going to have some open source solution. It's, and it's going to be as simple as possible. But somebody comes along, they want a commercial solution that has better speed or, better support. Probably is more important in this context. Then they should be able to do that. And if we're exposing the provider registry directly and having a UI to the provider registry, then if somebody's caching that data or they, referring, they've all of a sudden lost the link to the provider registry when they changed from one system to another.
Yeah, well, that is incorrect. That is incorrect. If you have another facility registry that supports the same APIs, right? Like whatever combination of APIs we come up with that the country decides to use, then it's just plug and play. I mean, you remove the other one, you put in the new one, and you're up and running.
No, but your server might be different, right? The IP address might change because you're gonna go to a hosted solution, or, from what I understood, the argument was that the HIM would help mitigate that risk.
Of IP addresses changing? No, that's DNS that does that, and so you would actually map it. You would map the DNS to a different.
I see the point here, though.
URL, or the base URL that you're accessing for a specific IP address. You want to change where, something is located under var www. I mean, there's lots of different use cases that could, or scenarios where this would be relevant, and essentially the HIM would just be a pass-through, the very simple case of any messages coming in for the facility registry. But it's, and I had specific pointed conversations with Ryan, especially about whether we want to break the ESB model and allow access to the provider registry directly, and the conclusion we came to was no. So
Yeah.
I'm not saying
Yeah,
that that's relevant for the facility registry. I'm just saying that's the conclusion that we came to for the provider registry. So
yeah.
I'm
And
just
it's not
bringing that to the table.
either or. You could have the HIM in the middle of all the business operations and workflows without necessarily preventing access to the provider registry. You could have the authentication and the authorization managed by an external entity, right? For example, you could have the provider registry be an authorization provider, so that when you fire somebody, they can't access the facility registry anymore, for example. And that does, that can be done without compromising access to the facility registry directly. I mean, there's all the things that we're talking as the problems. Going through the HIM physically is one model of solving it, but it's not the only one. And I just want us to keep that in mind.
Okay, obviously, maybe I guess the question is, what advantages do you see to accessing a facility registry directly if we're in the open HIE world?
Yep. So first of all, you actually can get the different clients to work on the facility registry. For example, if you wanted to have a client that adds a facility, right, you could have that added, and then the HIM steps in when the facility is added, and let's say it has to send an email to a boss whenever a facility gets added. The HIM can still do that, but the clients can work directly with the API of the facility registry. Then you don't need to replicate all the surface area of the API of the facility registry as a front end or as a facade to the HIM, which is a very large surface area. I mean, there's APIs that are not relevant to a health information management enterprise service bus. For example, all the GeoJSON standards that you need to support to integrate with GIS systems, right? You don't want an ESB to support all that facade and basically copy and paste all those APIs. And
well, I wouldn't need to copy and paste. I could just pass it through. I'd just say, okay, here's a message from the facility registry for, let me pass that on to the facility registry. I get the response and then send that on. I know there's a little bit of overhead in doing that translation, but I don't see how that's any. I don't see any. Besides that overhead, I don't see any distinct advantage.
So there's no. I mean, other than the disadvantage, there's no advantage.
Yeah, how would you do that? What would be an example of? I mean, I feel like you would need the same amount of knowledge to reach the facility registry through the HIM than to reach it directly. At least the same.
I'm not saying you wouldn't. I'm not saying you wouldn't. I'm just saying if we were to take the model, I'm asking the question is, what do you gain if you allow access to the facility registry directly versus through the HIM?
See, we're pretending that there's no overhead that the facility registry is going to incur by having to be able to do all of the authentication and security and message management that you could otherwise centralize in the HIM. So you now have to be able to do all of the things that would otherwise be done in the HIM directly in the facility registry.
No, the HIM, for example, doesn't currently support any standard for kind of like federated authentication. But if it did, right, it would be just the same overhead for a client to authenticate with the HIM than it would to authenticate with the facility registry. It's just
no, I'm saying you don't have to do that for every registry now, though. You do it in one place, and everything that is part of the data center side of the implementation shares the shared services, as opposed to each of them having to do it independently, because now if each of them has to be able to talk to the wild, they all have to be able to do all the things that the HIM was going to do.
No, the HIM still does it.
I apologize.
That's up to the facility registry. I mean, the way the facility registry manages authorization depends on each implementation.
Right.
I mean, if you go through the HIM, you still need to figure out a way of authorizing it. So it's just a different client from the perspective of the facility registry.
Yeah, and for example, if the HIM exposed its authorization functionality using some standard, right, and it was truly a service-oriented design where it says, I have a service for a authentication authority, I have a service for authorization, then registries could be able to use those services with very, very little overhead or concern, and it would like remove the need for them to maybe have their own authentication and authorization. If I just knew, oh, I'm using this authentication authority as a service there, that authorization authority as a service there. The issue that we have right now, Derek, is that we're confusing what an HIM environment should be with what it is. And right now it is not like a good implementer of the service-oriented patterns that you need for these sort of environments. So if we're going to be talking about the HIM, I think we should be talking about the HIM as it should be or as it is. When it is as it should be, it will make it very easy for all these services and any other services. Let's say that tomorrow somebody comes up with a water pump registry, right, or a sewers management service for the health information system. They will be able to reuse authentication and authorization services with very little overhead. Right now, however, because that is not done in a standards-based way, it's forcing like kind of like these false dichotomies of like doing either or, of like you either have to go to this API because it knows the magic data for authentication, and then it pulls all the cost of replacing the native facade of the HIM and adding all of the facades of all the underlying services, right? Which is an extra cost. So what I would say is if that's the concern, we should accelerate the guidance to the HIM in OHIE so that it is becoming, so that it does become a true service-oriented architecture facilitator and kind of like integrator of services. Because we're trying to kind of like do the full Monty with something that still only has a couple of wheels. And if we're going to be putting all those roles and responsibilities on that, it should be in a standards-based way, and we should accelerate that. But right now we're caught in this in-between thing, and it's causing a lot of these weird dialogues.
Yeah, no, I'm fine with that statement, and I do think we should move towards that. And I think, but I'm not sure if the raising it in the CSD is that's not the issue here, right?
Yeah,
I think we drifted away from the CSD conversation a bit, but.
Yeah, then the reason why we drifted a bit is because we said like the CSD interface is something that would be implemented by the HIM, not by the underlying registries. So we were thinking, what is a design that the underlying registries can have to facilitate that implementation of CSD?
The CSD has a number of named actors, and it's not like it's not a single API. It's a family of them, and you say which actor which role you're filling.
Yeah, so I was going to try to bring up the right. Okay, so for example, the CSD manager here, right? That could be physically implemented inside a inside the HIM, right? So I have a suggestion. We're 6 minutes past. We have these GitHub issues. Derek, have you seen them?
I've been traveling the last 3 days, so no, I haven't seen them. I took a quick look to one of them that was about how to do a link to provide a registry. That was the only one I looked at.
Okay, if you can. That
was 59, was it?
Yeah, that was.
So there's actually 2 issue trackers.
Yeah, there's 2 issue trackers.
That was the one from the.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, we were going to say something.
So, Derek, I think the one that you're looking at was at the Fred issue tracker, and Ed's talking about the CSD IHE issue tracker.
Okay. Yeah. No, I was looking at. You're right. I was looking at the other one.
So I gave you via Skype, Derek, the actual link, and if you don't mind making sure that you watch it at the top of the screen, there's an eye that says "Watch and Watch." If you don't mind watching it, then. It will make the actual kind of, you will get emails for the issues, and then you can reply to the emails, and it'll be like a listserv, right?
Okay.
But the replies to the different topics will be tracked by issue, which is kind of nice ways to navigate later. So feel free to either reply within the GitHub interface, or feel free to also reply via email, and the same thing goes to everybody else in the in the community. I know there's people who were on the phone saying, oh, I need to go and comment on those, but they haven't done so yet. So I'll just probably go on tomorrow, Friday, and kind of like beating some pots and pans to remind people to go do it.
I'm just going to say this because I'm being selfish, but this is doubling the number of things I have to track, Ed, because I already have an IHE listserv. Can we post them to there? Because
So it is a listserv, or is it like an issue tracking?
Well, I mean, am I going to get everybody on my IHE committee to track this? Because it's a committee-based process that we're involved in for CSD.
What we're trying to do is, like, we understand that you are the proxy to the IHE process, so we want to make sure that you have the aggregated feedback from the facility registry group as you process that input. We're not trying to facilitate the work that you do with the IHE group, rather to make sure that the feedback from this working group is, is correctly tracked. And if you want to give feedback from having calls with IHE and whatnot, you can just do it via the listserv. And if we see that some of those issues affect these, we can try to bring that back in. But then also, if things get accepted or rejected, we want it to be tracked on a case-by-case basis and also capture the rationale. So what we're trying to do here is create a consolidated place for feedback, because otherwise it's not clear whether the feedback should go into like the Word docs, or if you have feedback about the XSD, how it should happen. So this is trying to simplify that.
Maybe this would be an alternative. So there is that public comment period that's coming up, correct, Derek? I mean, couldn't we then pull these issues into the public comment period and raise it and encapsulate it there?
Yeah, actually, that was all I was going to beg for, was that the feedback regarding the CSD would go into the existing CSD feedback mechanisms, because, I mean, I appreciate the idea that I'm going to be the proxy for all of this, but honestly, all of the feedback is to be brought to that process. And instead of saying, well, I'm going to put it all here in a separate place, and I'm going to ask Derek to track it all, then I'm going to ask Derek to talk to IHE and then see what IHE says and bring it back. Why don't we just engage everybody in, regarding CSD, why don't we engage everybody in the IHE process as opposed to a separate one and then expecting it all to funnel through me? Because
my understanding is that you're the one who's writing the CSD proposals and editing that document?
I am an editor on that document.
Yeah, okay, so I mean, wouldn't it be appropriate for you to be getting this in an aggregated form?
If there are issues about it that are, so you want me to bring them to the committee. I was just going to say, why doesn't it come to the committee directly? Why would I be the middleman? No, it's not, Ed, I'm not going to take and deviate from the existing path and rewrite it all and then bring it back to the committee and say, you know, all those things that we've talked about in committee for the last 6 months, now I want to change them, and here's why. Mm-hmm. Why don't we bring these to the committee directly? Because they'll pass muster or not pass muster at committee, right? Whether I bring it or not.
Yeah, so maybe you can do that. I mean, the hope here, Derek, is that you can have all these things to bring up to committee and already pre-distilled way with input from all this group. Kind of like, so you have a nice package of issues with like a bow, and already like some internal kind of like shooting and debate has happened, so that they're more polished by the time you have them, and you can bring to committee something that is either survive that initial dialogue and is still relevant, or that you feel for some reason it's relevant, and you can bring it forward. But it is our expectation that there is some level of management of the IHE process that you will do with this content. Yes.
All I'm saying is that there's a set of constraints in that process that I have to work within, and to say that I'm going to bring all of these issues and I feel a bit like I'm the note passer in class.
Well, Derek, I think we can help, bring up the concerns, whether in the public comment period or, in the short-term work that we're doing. But what we really wanted to do was facilitate an ongoing conversation with the broader facility registry community. Since not everybody can be, completely engaged or working directly with IHE, but to bring in the expertise of the various members of the facility registry community and have that dialogue here, and then we can put the bow on it and make it nice and help get that passed into the IHE review process as well.
Well, and from a governance standpoint, I guess I wanted to hold out that everybody can have direct input into the IHE process, and it would carry more weight to do it that way.
And let me just say that I participated in that already in one call, and that it was very easy to do, and my comments were welcome, and there was no, there's no issue with direct engagement with IHE on the CSD profile from our perspective.
So Derek, you're saying that, for example, on next Monday's call, we can show up and bring up these issues?
That would be incredibly more impactful.
Okay.
And you know what? And I think one of the things that would also be helpful is for everybody to appreciate what the constraints are. We don't standards develop at IHE. We standards profile.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a genuine constraint, and that we're not able to say, well, we got together on a call and we've decided it should be this way. And someone says, oh, okay, you're profiling what standard? No. We decided it should be this way.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not able. First of all, I'm not going to write that into the specification because it's a constraint of the specification that I'm referencing an underlying standard. So I can't say that the underlying standard is the one I made up. They'll immediately say, yeah, okay.
Okay.
It's not one of the options I can choose.
Okay, so if we're going to do that, we need to have like your response to these things, because you've been on the committee so far. So if you don't mind reading them and at least leaving a couple of notes about what the current standing is with regards to these, that would be important, because it doesn't make sense. Yeah. So just if you don't mind going through those things, I think I just gave you the link.
Yeah, you did, and and I've got it up here.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, this might be a nice point to to wrap things up today. I'm not sure if anybody else has any other final thoughts or questions that we can put on our agenda for our next call. We're maybe 15 minutes over our time allotment. Anybody have any final thoughts or questions?
And I'm sorry for my part in us being late.
Don't worry about it, Derek. We're happy to have you here.
All right.
Jorge, any final thoughts?
Not as good. Right now.
Okay.
All right. And Martin, is there any of the recent changes to the resource map technology that you want to share? I don't know if about the deployment automation and things like that that's been happening that Rwanda used and might be interesting to the other people.
Well, we've been working. Sorry for the for being stuck. On packaging resource map as a DB package, so you can do apt-get install and have the server running. Once you have that, you can just upgrade the application by doing the usual apt-get update and get your system upgraded. That's pretty much all about the deployment automation.
Quick question: is that an auto build on Launchpad or anything, or where's that, or GitHub?
Resource map, it's in Bitbucket.
So Carl, what Martin is referring to is doing Debian packages. So basically, you just run one command line, and this thing looks at what things you have on your machine, looks at what are the dependencies of resource map, gets resource map from online, the web, gets all the dependencies.
I know what that is. What I'm saying is that there is automatic building services for Debian packages on Launchpad, which we've used before, which are quite nice. So I was just wondering if you were hosting it yourself, or.
No, we are going to upload that to PPA.
Okay. Great. Cool.
There were just a couple of details we had to polish to do that, because it expects some files, some specific files for formats or structures, and we just need to settle the details about that. But yeah, that's the idea.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Sorry, I didn't understood the question before.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining today, and definitely, if anyone who can give additional feedback to the Bitbucket, issues around Fred and IHE, that's definitely welcome and encouraged. And I think you all should have the links through emails that we've been sending out. But let us know if you have a hard time finding anything. But yeah. So why don't we wrap up for today?
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.